A compliance officer at a regional bank approves an internal language model deployment on one condition. The model vendor must provide a signed business associate agreement covering the inference infrastructure. The data cannot leave the building. The model must have a documented update and vulnerability management process. And someone with a phone number must be accountable when something goes wrong at 2 in the morning. The team evaluating open weight models has no answer for any of those requirements. Not because open weight models cannot meet them technically, because nobody is contractually obligated to help them meet them. 3 weeks later, the team is in a commercial self-hosted evaluation. The open weight path was not wrong. It was incomplete for that specific deployment context. This is the commercial self-hosted option, Models Part 10. Open weight is not the only path infrastructure you control. Here's what the commercial lane actually looks like. Section 1. What commercial self-hosted actually is. Commercial self-hosted is a licensing and deployment arrangement where a model vendor provides weights, tooling, and support under a commercial contract, and those weights run on infrastructure you control rather than on the vendor servers. The distinction from a public API is straightforward. With a public API, your inference traffic leaves your infrastructure and lands on the vendor servers. With commercial self-hosted, the model runs on your hardware or your cloud tenancy. The vendor provides the weights and the support contract. You provide the compute and the operational management. One distinction from open weight is less obvious but equally important. An open weight model gives you the weights under a license that may or may not permit your use case and comes with no vendor accountability for performance, updates, or security patches. A commercial self-hosted arrangement gives you the weights under a contract that specifies what the vendor will do and will not do, for how long, and what service level. For organizations that need data sovereignty or self-hosted inference at the contractual accountability of a vendor relationship, commercial self-hosted is the only option that provides both simultaneously. Section 2. What the landscape looks like. The commercial self-hosted market has matured significantly since 2023. Several providers now offer enterprise deployment arrangements that cover the full range of organizational requirements from startup to regulated enterprise. Cohere offers its Command family of models under enterprise licensing arrangements that include on-premises and private cloud deployment options. Command R and Command R Plus are optimized for retrieval augmented generation workloads, which makes them directly relevant to the pipeline this ARC builds. Cohere's enterprise contracts include data processing agreements, SLA commitments, and dedicated support. For organizations building RAG pipelines in regulated industries, the alignment between the model's optimization target and the deployment requirement is worth the licensing cost evaluation. Mistral AI offers enterprise licensing for its models beyond the open weight Apache 2.0 releases. The enterprise tier includes private deployment options, dedicated support, and fine-tuning services. For organizations that want Mistral's performance profile with contractual accountability rather than community support, the enterprise path is the same model family with a different relationship structure around it. IBM's Granite model family is designed explicitly for enterprise deployment with compliance requirements. Granite models are trained on curated datasets with documented provenance, which matters for regulated industries, where the training data composition of a deployed model is subject to audit. IBM offers these under enterprise licensing with the full weight of IBM support and compliance infrastructure behind them. For organizations in financial services, healthcare, or government, training data provenance is a compliance requirement rather than a preference. Granite is the only open weight adjacent option with documented answers to those questions. NVIDIA's NIM, Neural Interface Microservices, is a deployment platform rather than a model family. NIM packages optimized model weights from multiple providers, including Llama, Mistral, and others, in a containerized inference microservices with enterprise support from NVIDIA. For organizations that want open weight model performance with enterprise deployment tooling and vendor accountability, NIM offers a middle path between raw open weight and a fully commercial model relationship. Section 3. The trade-offs. 4 trade-offs define the commercial self-hosted decision. Each one resolves differently depending on your organizational context. Cost is the most visible trade-off. Commercial self-hosted licensing adds cost that open weight deployment does not carry. That cost buys vendor accountability, support, and in some cases, compliance certification. Whether the cost is justified depends on what the alternative actually costs when you factor in the engineering time requiring to manage open-weight deployments without vendor support, the risk exposure of operating without a documented vulnerability management process, and the compliance costs of building certifications from scratch rather than inheriting them from a vendor relationship. For a small technical team, deploying internally, open-weight is almost always cheaper in total cost. For an enterprise deployment in a regulated industry, the calculus frequency reverses. Flexibility is the second trade-off. Open-weight models can be fine-tuned, modified, and extended within the terms of their license using any tooling the team chooses. Commercial self-hosted arrangements typically restrict what you can do with the weights and how. Fine-tuning may be permitted, prohibited, or available only as a vendor-managed service. If your use case requires aggressive domain adaptation through fine-tuning, verify that the commercial license permits it before signing a contract. Update cadence is the third trade-off and the most commonly overlooked during vendor evaluation. An open-weight model community releases updates when the research warrants it. A commercial vendor releases updates on a schedule governed by their development cycle and support commitments. For some organizations, a predictable, tested update cadence with advance notice is worth more than the latest model weights available immediately. For others, the ability to adopt new open-weight releases as they appear is the priority. Neither preference is wrong. The mismatch between organizational update tolerance and vendor update cadence is a common source of commercial self-hosted dissatisfaction. Compliance certification is the fourth trade-off, and the one that most clearly defines when commercial self-hosted is the right call. SOC 2, HIPAA, FedRAMP, and similar compliance frameworks require documented evidence of security controls, vulnerability management, and operational procedures. An open-weight deployment requires you to produce that evidence yourself. A commercial self-hosted arrangement from a vendor with existing certifications transfers a significant portion of that documentation burden to the vendor relationship. For organizations that face compliance audits on a defined timeline, the documentation inheritance from a commercial vendor is frequently the deciding factor. Section 4, when commercial self-hosted is the right call. 3 conditions indicate commercial self-hosted over open-weight for a given deployment. First, when contractual accountability is a requirement rather than a preference. If your organization needs a signed agreement specifying what the model vendor will do when something goes wrong, open-weight does not provide that. Community forums and GitHub issues are not a support contract. Second, when compliance certification inheritance reduces audit burden materially. If you are building towards a SOC 2 audit or operating in a HIPAA and the vendor's existing certifications cover your deployment architecture, the documentation you inherit is worth evaluating against the license costs directly. Third, when internal operational capacity for open-weight model management is generally constrained, managing open-weight model updates, monitoring for security vulnerabilities in model weights and serving infrastructure, and maintaining deployment tooling without vendor support requires engineering capacity that not every organization has. Commercial self-hosted transfers that operational burden to the vendor relationship. If none of those 3 conditions applies to your deployment context, open-weight is the right path. The capability gap between commercial self-hosted and open-weight models at equivalent parameter counts is not large enough by 2026 to justify the cost and flexibility of trade-offs on capabilities ground alone. Section 4. What this ARC uses and why. The build articles in this ARC use open-weight models. The NOAA pipeline does not operate in a regulated industry context, does not require compliance certification inheritance, and the reader following this ARC is building towards operational understanding rather than enterprise production deployment on day one. The commercial self-hosted landscape matters for this ARC because the reader building this pipeline today may be deploying it in a regulated context tomorrow. Understanding when to switch lanes is part of building the judgment that makes self-hosted deployment durable rather than just functional. Next, before the build articles begin, 2 conceptual foundations remain. How you instruct the model shapes its output as much as the model itself. Prompt design and system prompt architecture are not afterthoughts. They are the layers between the model's weights and the results your application produces.